We'll move to questions without notice. Just before I call the Leader of the Opposition, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the special visitors gallery today is His Excellency Mr. Dava Seren Damdin Suren, the Ambassador for Mongolia, and Her Excellency Ms. Batsetseg Batmoon, the Foreign Minister of Mongolia. On behalf of the House, I extend a warm welcome, and I'm also pleased to inform the House that present in the special visitors gallery is Constable Deborah Bradley and Constable Aaron Larson from Wadeye Police Station, and recipients of the 2023 Police Bravery Award. Questions without notice, and I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. Australians are watching the slow-moving train wreck that is the Albanese government.
Order.
Energy, grocery prices and mortgages are up because of incompetent and economy-wrecking decisions made by the Prime Minister, the Treasurer and the Energy Minister. The Prime Minister's campaign on the Voice is a disaster, dividing families and our nation. When will the Prime Minister start making decisions which will help and not hurt Australians?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his sledge, and it really was a very wide bow, Mr Speaker. So it gives me the opportunity to give a very wide answer, because the Leader of the Opposition has a record of deception as long as your arm.
Order.
He speaks about our energy policy. Well, this is a guy who said that business leaders were complaining to him about our safeguard mechanism, when in fact the business community, including the BCA, said their members supported it. He then went on to talk about energy policy while voting against relief, $3 billion of relief for Australian families.
The member for Fairfax.
He claimed that he'd had conversations with Indigenous elders in Leonora to convince him to vote no in the referendum, when those same elders say that he advised them to vote yes. That's what they had to say. He told his own party room their official position would be a legislated national voice, and then blindsided them by going into a press conference and getting rid of any concept of a national voice. He solemnly, last week in this chamber, he stood up at this dispatch box and said it was a good thing that we were attending ASEAN and the G20 and participating in international forums, and said when the Prime Minister leaves Australia to represent our nation, we're bipartisan. We want the world to know that. And then the next day mocked it, and then the next day opposed it. He accused the AEC of rigging the referendum.
Order. The Minister for Infrastructure will cease to. The Minister for Skills. Want to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Speaker, on relevance, it was a wide-ranging question. He can talk about any of his government's decisions. He won't talk about any of them. What's he got to hide?
Order. Order. We're just going to continue with the answer. I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
He went on radio, Mr Speaker, and accused the AEC of rigging the referendum, when the same rules have been in place since the Howard government. Exactly the same. Exactly the same. And yesterday, in a tour de force, he actually tried to verbal the Minister for Indigenous Affairs on the very same day that it had occurred in Hansard. He goes on, of course he said that Alan Joyce had dinner at the lodge in Kirribilli when the last time he was there was under Prime Minister Morrison. And this is what he had to say about Qantas. Qantas is an iconic Australian brand. All of us have pride in seeing the success of the company. Alan Joyce is an exceptional CEO. I know Alan Joyce. He is exceptional, both professionally and personally. Like, this guy just says one thing, whatever's convenient at the time. whatever's convenient at the time, and never actually stands up for Australia's interests.
The House comes to order. I'll hear from the member for Cornwall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. What is the outcome of the High Court case in relation to Qantas and its workers? What was the government's role, and how did this differ from the previous government's approach?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for Arts.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for Cornwall for the question, someone who represents many workers, many aviation workers in her area. The government welcomes the decision of the High Court today, and we congratulate the workers and we congratulate the Transport Workers Union, which took this case forward. Some of those 1,700 illegally sacked workers are here today in the public gallery right now. I met with three of them just before question time: Damien Pollard, Gavin Byrne and Craig Fielding. Damien Pollard, some of you may have seen him in the media conference straight outside the High Court, where he referred to a sense of justification and redemption. I say to the workers who are illegally sacked, you did nothing wrong. Qantas broke the law, and the government of the time left you stranded. The difference in the approach between that government and this government now could not be more stark. Let's not forget what happened. They paid JobKeeper, saying that was for people to keep jobs.
The Minister will pause. There's far too much noise on my left. I cannot hear a word that is being said. If this continues, people will leave the chamber. It's far too much noise. I mean it. The Minister has the call.
JobKeeper was paid to Qantas. The aviation sector support was provided, and then Qantas said the workers, even though they were being paid JobKeeper, would run down their leave, and once their leave had been run down and they came to be brought back on shift, they were told after being stood down for 6 months that they were fired. That's what happened. While their leave was being run down, the Industrial Relations Minister of the day said it was, I quote, a good model. The Transport Minister of the day said, I know the decisions are in the best interest of their company going forward. And Senator Cash at the time said, this is a commercial decision for Qantas, and Qantas are entitled to make those decisions. Well, you are not entitled to illegally sack people. And while that was happening, from opposition, the now Transport Minister, the now Prime Minister and myself stood shoulder to shoulder with those workers and said we would fight for them.
Order.
From time to time, governments make decisions as to whether they'll intervene in a High Court case. Those opposite will know this, because they did intervene in High Court cases. They intervened to cut the conditions in enterprise agreements. They intervened in another case to cut the rights of casuals. They intervened to cut the rights of shift workers. Well, we intervened to protect the rights of those Qantas workers. And we welcome today that justice has been given for those workers after experiencing horrific treatment from a company that those opposite made excuses for, that those opposite made allowances for, and are now in a situation where, after we have stood shoulder to shoulder, where those workers now can see some justice.
Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. The member for Hume will cease interjecting. I would like to hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. She has the call.
My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Yesterday, the Minister said in this House, I call on everyone involved in this referendum to act respectfully. Yesterday, Government appointee Marsha Langton told David Crowe, I'm saying the claims being made by the No case are based in racism and stupidity. Does the Minister believe Professor Langton's comments accord with her request for everyone involved to act respectfully?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member opposite for her question. I want to again say this. Everyone in this debate should act respectfully and with care for one another. This referendum is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our Constitution. If we miss this moment, it's gone forever. Recognition should be an issue that is above politics. There are no second chances here. The tone of the debate in this parliament matters. There must be a mutual respect here. We must be guided by love and by faith. Love for our fellow Australians and faith in a better future. I do not know how Australians will vote on October 14. None of us do. What I do know for certain is this: we are the greatest country in the world, and we can be even greater if we embrace recognition, if we pay respect and celebrate the 65,000 years of culture and tradition of First Nations people, if we listen through a voice to some of the most disadvantaged communities in our country. We must listen, Mr Speaker.
Give the call to the member for Aston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government getting on with the job of delivering more affordable housing for Australians and the economy after a wasted decade?
I'll give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Thanks to the member for Aston for her question, but also for caring so deeply about people in her community looking for affordable properties, and particularly the renters in her part of the world. A really important development today, Mr Speaker, as the Senate cleared the way for the next stage of the consideration of the Housing Australia Future Fund. And we thank those in the Senate who were prepared to support the HAF so that we could get this moving. This is the biggest single investment in social housing since the member for Sydney was the Housing Minister over a decade ago. And it is part of a broad and ambitious agenda that we have for housing. It's an important part of our housing plan, but it's not the only part of our housing plan.
The Treasurer will pause. The member for Deakin is continually interjecting again today. Had a good go yesterday. He's going to remain silent for the remainder of this answer to assist me hearing the answer. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. Now, on top of the Housing Australia Future Fund, across our first two budgets, this government and this Prime Minister has committed in excess of $8 billion in new funding to deliver more houses, more supply and more relief for renters, because we want more Australians to have the security and the dignity of a decent home and a decent roof over their head. Now, yesterday, the Minister for Housing launched the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council's report into barriers to institutional investment in housing, and that report sets out a range of ways that we can help get more investment in housing in this country. But we are already taking a number of steps across a number of fronts. We're working with the states and local government and institutional investors and the industry to unlock more supply through our National Housing Accord and our National Housing Target. And as the Minister said yesterday, the Housing Australia Future Fund will provide a secure income stream that will give institutional investors the certainty that they need to invest. Now, we know, Mr Speaker, that inflation and cost of living pressures, including in housing, are still the biggest challenge in our economy. We understand that people are under the pump, and that applies to people struggling to find a roof over their head as well. Now, this is a long-standing challenge, but we are taking decisive action across a range of areas, Mr Speaker. We have had a wasted decade when it comes to investment in housing, and we are doing our best to turn that around and to clean up the mess that we inherited. We are working to get more homes, more supply, making it easier to own a home, and also taking some of the sting out of these higher rents with the biggest increase in Commonwealth rent assistance in 3 decades, Mr Speaker. Now, we know, of course, there is more work to be done, but this is a government which is working for Australia, delivering billions of dollars in investment in housing, building more homes and more supply, and helping to ease the pressure on renters. And that's why, despite all of that effort, Mr Speaker, it beggars belief that in the Senate today those opposite voted for fewer homes and more homelessness and higher rents. We are cleaning up the mess they left behind.
far too much noise on my left. The member for Wannon is continually interjecting throughout the answers. So when I call you, that means cease interjecting. If it continues on, you'll get warned and then you'll leave the chamber. I hope everyone's clear on the process after this time. Give the call to the member for Curtin.
This is a question for the Deputy Prime Minister. You've not released the ONI report on the security risk of climate. We're still waiting for an integrated national climate risk assessment. Do you agree with the internationally accepted findings that the impacts of climate change will drive political instability and fuel regional and international conflict? And what specific policy responses does the government propose to risks like food security, mass migration and the destabilisation of markets?
Give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, I thank the member for her question, and she raises a critically important issue in terms of the geostrategic position that we face and the strategic landscape that we face. And the short answer to your question is I do accept that the pressures of climate change will give rise to a more complex and volatile strategic landscape for the world, but a strategic landscape that we must face as well. And that, in terms of our landscape, is reflective of the fact that a lot of the pressures in relation to climate change and its impacts on populations around the world happen in respect of populations around us. And so we will need to be very mindful of the way in which we posture ourselves in respect of that. Hence the fact that the ONI has been deeply engaged on this question, as has defence planning. This is an issue which was given consideration in the Defence Strategic Review in terms of the demands that have been placed on the Australian Defence Force, but it is also, beyond what was described in the Defence Strategic Review, an issue which is being considered in the context of the geostrategic landscape that we face and what issues that might give rise to in the future. This is a really important issue. I very much thank the member for raising it, and we are very keen to engage with not only the crossbench but the entirety of the parliament about the way in which our country can plan for that future.
Give the call to the honourable member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How does the Housing Australia Future Fund work together with the Albanese Labor government, other housing actions to help more Australians build, rent or buy a home, and is there any opposition to this comprehensive approach?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Swan for her question and for her passionate support of dealing with housing issues as a new member of our parliament who has had a real impact representing those inner suburbs of Perth in Western Australia. The HAF indeed is one of our key election commitments, and I'm pleased that it will pass the parliament. It does mean 30,000 additional social and affordable homes, but importantly as well, it means 4,000 of those homes will be provided for women and children escaping domestic violence. There is a great need, and too many women and their kids spend a night in the car, in the park, in someone else's home, swapping from home to home as they struggle to escape domestic violence, which remains a scourge in this country, tragically. Now, this will make a difference, as will the increased support for veterans as a result of this. Tonight I'll be speaking of the Veterans Employment Awards, and I'm sure that they would recognise the positive impact that this legislation will have. It will also help to fix up housing in remote and regional communities of Indigenous communities, Indigenous Australians. So this is very, very positive, and it's part of the $8 billion commitment of new investment that we have had, the single biggest investment in housing for more than a decade, part of our comprehensive plan. the new national target of 1.2 million homes with the $3 billion new homes bonus for states and territories, the $2 billion of the social housing accelerator, the better deal for renters, including the increase in rent assistance. And we're already seeing some of that planning changes come through. In the ACT this week, a very positive announcement to enable dual occupancy to occur on land in the inner suburbs which are developed, which have infrastructure to enable someone to build another dwelling on their land in order to house a relative or to rent it out in order to increase that housing supply. And I congratulate the ACT government and Andrew Barr on doing that. This week we committed as well an additional $1 billion in funding for the National Housing Infrastructure Facility. More homes for more Australians who need them. Part of our plan, Working for Australia. And it is extraordinary that the Coalition and their friends in One Nation continue to oppose this legislation in the Senate. But I'm pleased that enough people have seen common sense and there will be a majority for this program.
Before I call the member for Parkes, he will get the call. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Mr Volkmar Klein, the member of the German Parliament and Deputy Chair of the German Pacific Parliamentary Friendship Group. But also in the House is a delegation of scholars from Indonesia participating in the G20 Recover Together, Recover Stronger Scholarships Enrichment Program. Warm welcome to you all. I give the call to the honourable member for Parkes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. It has been reported that a video has emerged of a member of the Minister's Referendum Working Group, Professor Marshall Langdon, stating that social workers are, quote, by and large white and racist, and, quote, police are racist, and, quote, get brownie points for rounding people up. Does the Minister believe Professor Langdon's comments accord with her request for Australians to act respectfully, and will the Minister condemn Professor Langdon's comments?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Parkes for his question. On October 14, Australians will come together to vote on whether we should recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our Constitution. This is our moment to embrace recognition, our moment to move Australia forward more united, our moment to listen to the voices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I say once again, there is no room for racism in Australia. The pain of racism is real for those people who have experienced it. It is something that should not be used for political purposes. It is something that we should all agree is harmful and unacceptable. And it is something that we should all agree must stop. I have faith in the Australian people to engage in this debate respectfully, to walk in other people's shoes, to approach this referendum with empathy and with compassion towards one another.
The member for Hawke has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. How is the Albanese Labor government's broad housing agenda, including the Housing Australia Future Fund, helping more Australians to find a safe, affordable place to call home?
Order. Members on my left. Give the call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I do want to thank the member for Hawke for his support for the Housing Australia Future Fund. I know that he understands just how important it is that this fund pass the parliament this week so we can get on with building the homes that so many Australians need. Indeed, this fund will be life-changing for so many Australians. It will create, as I said yesterday, an ongoing pipeline of funding to help build social and affordable homes right across the country. Not just for this government, not just in 5 years, but there in perpetuity, so that we can have a steady flow and pipeline of social and affordable homes into the future.
and it is supported by our ambitious housing agenda. Our $3 billion new homes bonus for the 1.2 million homes target from 1 July 2024, our $500 million housing support program, our $2 billion social housing accelerator, our National Housing Accord and the additional 10,000 affordable homes that will come from that accord, our boost to the Commonwealth rent assistance, our additional $2 billion in financing for more social and affordable homes, our new incentives to boost the supply of rentals, including the build-to-rent changes that we made in the budget, our leadership on progressing renters' rights, our $1.7 billion one-year extension to the Housing and Homelessness Agreement, and, of course, our extensions to the Home Guarantee Scheme, with the Regional First Home Buyers Guarantee and the 67,000 people in Australia that are in their first home sooner because of this government. And we've heard from the experts about how these measures will help. But the most important feedback is, of course, from the people whose lives have been changed by safe and secure housing.
Members on my left.
People like Laurie, who I've mentioned in this place before. Laurie had been homeless for more than 2 years before she had access to social housing. And she told me, without the constant stress of every day having to find somewhere to sleep, that she now has the time and the energy to go back to school. And it's about people like Sean and Lisa. Sean had been needing surgery, but the doctors couldn't operate because he had nowhere secure to be discharged from hospital to. Lisa has told me that Sean now has had that operation because he finally has a place to call home and he can get that surgery. Access to housing will change lives for so many Australians. The social and affordable housing that the Albanese government is already building will change lives, and it will mean essential workers like Elise, a midwife in Western Sydney that I met, can access affordable housing close to where they work. It will mean social housing recipients like Diane and John, who I met in Melbourne, can remain part of a community that they love. It's what our government is doing, working each and every day to make sure that more Australians can have a safe, affordable place to call home.
Give the call to the honourable member for Mallee.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. There are at least 250 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander language groups across our country. With 24 members, how will The Voice reconcile different or competing priorities between the many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, customs, languages and laws?
Order. The Minister for Home Affairs will cease interjecting, particularly whilst the Minister is approaching the dispatch box. The Indigenous Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the member for her question. I want to read to the House the proposed question and the proposed amendments because they will answer your question. A proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the first people of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed alteration? The proposed amendments, and I read these.
Order.
In recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia. 1. There shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice.
Order. The member for Lingiari. The Leader of the Opposition, a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On relevance, I don't know whether the minister needs to hear the question again, or why can't, instead of reading from this script each and every time, could you answer the question asked?
Seats. The Leader of the House.
To the point of order, I'm not sure if the Leader of the Opposition was listening to the start of the answer, but in the start of the answer it was explained that this context would provide the answer to what had been put. It was explained exactly at the start. Yeah. Exactly at the start. It was
Members on my left. The Minister was asked about the implications or how The Voice will deal with language and customs, and she's referring directly to the referendum, and she's reading a document and supporting her answer with that. she's being relevant to the question. I don't think anyone denies that, so I'm just going to allow her to continue, but I'll listen closely to make sure she's within the standing orders.
2. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice may make representations to the Parliament and the Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. 3. The Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice.
The Minister will pause. The one point of order under the standing orders has already been taken under relevance, so I'll need the Deputy Leader to state the standing order she's taking the point of order on.
Mr. Speaker, I seek your ruling that the Minister simply citing the words that she has, and this is the third answer this question time, that in no way addresses the questions that have been asked, is actually within the standing orders.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. The Leader of the House.
To seek a ruling, someone has to raise a point of order, which the Deputy Leader has just refused to do when you requested that a point of order be raised. The only one you could possibly be doing is one that's already been done.
Well, it's not in order to raise this, and it's not a valid point of order, and it's not possible to go back in time to ask what was your ruling when I'd already given the ruling. So the Minister in continuation.
The Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures.
Give the call to the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Why is it important for the debate on the voice referendum to be informed by the facts?
Order. Members on my left, the member for Page and the Leader of the Nationals will cease objecting. The Attorney-General has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I do thank the member for Fremantle for his question. Mr Speaker, the 14th of October will be a very significant moment in our country's history. It will be an opportunity to finally recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Australian Constitution. It is important that Australians make a decision based on the facts. But the no campaign strategy has been to ignore the facts and instead to sow fear and division across our great country. And don't take my word for it. We know that these are the directions the official No campaign is giving to its volunteers. Ignore the facts and say anything to distract from the actual issue on the ballot paper. An opposition leader with an ounce of decency would distance himself from a strategy based on disinformation and deceit. He would call it out.
Is warned.
Not this opposition leader. No claim is too outlandish. No claim is too sinister. No claim is too absurd for this opposition leader. He'll say anything. He'll do anything to spread confusion and divide our country.
The Minister for Climate Change is not helping. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, as you and all members would be fully aware, Standing Order 90 says that all imputations of improper motives to a member shall be considered highly disorderly. The Attorney-General has just spent the first part of his answer imputing improper motives to the Leader of the Opposition. He's in breach of the standing orders and he should be drawn back to them.
Just going to hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, just to the point of order, there is a difference between imputing motives and describing conduct, and the Attorney-General has been describing the conduct of the Leader of the Opposition.
Order. The Manager on the point of order.
Even by the standards of the Leader of the House, that is an unusually nonsensical proposition.
Just going to remind the Attorney-General to be mindful of that Standing Order 90 about not imputing motives in his answer. He's entitled to give his view, but just make sure he is within the standing orders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's talk about some facts. The proposed constitutional amendment says the Voice will have the power to make representations on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That is a fact. The Leader of the Opposition ignores this fact and asserts that the Voice would influence every area of public administration and grind the whole of government to a halt. This is wrong, and the Leader of the Opposition must know that it is wrong. The proposed constitutional amendment says that the Parliament will have power to determine the powers of the Voice. That is a fact. The Leader of the Opposition ignores this fact and asserts that the High Court would determine its powers, not the Parliament. This is wrong, and the Leader of the Opposition must know that this is wrong.
Members on my left.
I am confident that Australians will see through the Opposition Leader's tactics. Australians want outcomes, not arguments. Australians want the truth and not grubby tactics. The referendum on the 14th of October is about three things: recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in our Constitution, listening to them, and by listening, achieving better outcomes.
When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Hughes.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. The Minister told Australians through the website of her agency, the National Indigenous Australians Agency, that, quote, a Makarrata Commission will also be co-designed to work on a national process of treaty making. Can the Minister update the House on this government's plan for treaty making?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for her question. This side of the House is laser-focused on one thing that we have spoken about, and that is the referendum on the 14th of October. We are appealing. We are appealing to the Australian people with thousands and thousands of other Australians to recognise Aboriginal people in the Constitution. And as I said yesterday, this is good for all of us. It is also about creating.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
It is also about creating a voice enshrined by the Constitution to get better advice, so that we make sure that what we do in terms of Aboriginal affairs changes the terrible life trajectory that so many people have.
Call to the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Treasurer. What are the benefits of recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples through a voice for both Australian society and the Australian economy? And what are the consequences of alternative proposals?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Thanks to the member for understanding what the PM has said on a number of occasions. This is First Nations people reaching out their hand to us, and we shouldn't slap their hands away. This is a gracious and generous invitation, and it's a generational opportunity. This is our chance to bring together our principles and our pragmatism and do something that we can be genuinely proud of. Now, the voice, Mr Speaker, is about constitutional recognition, it's about listening, and it's about getting better outcomes for the first of us in a way that could lift all of us up. It's about doing things differently and doing things better in our economy and in our society, and getting better value for money as we try and close the gap. That's what the voice is about. It's not about the lies and the misinformation which we have seen peddled by parts of the No campaign. Now, the Leader of the Opposition has not distanced himself from that misinformation. He has embraced it. he has embraced it. In this campaign of misinformation and mistruths, the opposition leader is the chief propagandist, Mr Speaker. We saw that yesterday.
Order. Manager opposition business on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, it's a very similar point of order to the one that was necessary because of the answer from the Attorney-General. You ruled rightly there, and the Treasurer too should be reminded of Standing Order 90 and should be counselled against drawing imputations against other members in this House.
The question contained— I listened to both questions, and there is a slight difference in this question because it did say to discuss the alternative proposals. So I'm just assuming that's where the Treasurer is headed, but I just remind all members of that Standing Order and the language that they use to show respect for one another in the chamber. And I give him the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We saw misinformation in the way that the Leader of the Opposition tried to verbal Minister Burney yesterday in this place.
Order.
Minister Burney is a person of authority and character and grace who wants nothing more and nothing less than better outcomes for people in this country, Mr Speaker. Now, the Leader of the Opposition has taken the weirdest whispers from the furthest fringes of social media and legitimised them and amplified them here in the People's House of the Parliament. And he has seen this from the very beginning, not as a chance for unity, but as an excuse to practice the usual nasty and negative and angry and dishonest and divisive politics. And that's why his policy is for 2 referendums, Mr Speaker, not 1.
The Treasurer will pause. The Manager on a point of order.
Well, since you reminded the Treasurer of Standing Order 90, he has spent the next part of his answer continuing to consistently impute improper motives, and he should not be doing it. It is unparliamentary. There's a number of things he's said there which, frankly, he should be withdrawing.
The Assistant Treasurer is not helping. Please cease interjecting. The Leader of the House on a point of order.
2 things. On direct relevance, the question went to the consequences of alternatives, which is exactly what the Treasurer is now doing. And secondly, it would be extraordinary if accusing someone of divisiveness was now considered beyond parliamentary debate. And that's something like that has never been considered the imputation of a motive.
Order. Just going to ask the Treasurer to temper his language, but he's able to answer the question as he sees fit within the standing orders. I can't compel anyone to answer a certain way that anyone would like. Only the Treasurer or the Minister can do that. Here's the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. One of the consequences of the Leader of the Opposition's policy for 2 referendums, not 1, is that this will drag out for as long as possible so the Leader of the Opposition can drip more poison into the well, Mr Speaker. And that's how he seeks to divide and diminish this country and reap a political dividend from that.
I'll hear from the Deputy Leader, but I want to deal with this matter.
The House needs to absolutely insist that the Treasurer withdraw that disgraceful slur.
Look, to assist the House to get through this question time, I want the Treasurer— this is the final time I'm telling him— I'm going to ask him to just withdraw that last part so we can continue to assist the House.
Mr Speaker. Australia can rise above the anger, the division and the dishonesty which characterises the Leader of the Opposition's approach to this referendum. We can get this done in 1 referendum and in the process not leave it to our kids to sort out in some kind of generational buck pass. That's the opportunity before us, Mr Speaker, and it's an opportunity that we cannot afford to waste.
Before I call the member for Fowler, the member for Casey doesn't seem to be getting the memo. He's continually interjecting through every answer. He will leave the chamber under 94A. And if people continue the same behaviour, they will leave as well. Give the call to the honourable member for Fowler.
Thank you, Speaker. The question is to the Minister for Infrastructure. Western Sydney Airport is on track to be Australia's next international transport hub, handling up to 5 million passengers a year. This will bolster the Australian economy in Western Sydney with job opportunities, especially for locals. How committed is the government to building the much-needed rail link that will connect the community and those in Fowler to the new airport and to the 3 major CBDs of Sydney? And can you guarantee we will not be the forgotten people when allocating funding and resources? Thank you.
Call to the member for Lindsay. Do not interject whilst a minister is approaching the dispatch box. Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thanks very much to the member for Fowler for her question, and I know she is an incredibly passionate advocate alongside the many members on this side of the House for Western Sydney, an important part of not only New South Wales' economy but the whole nation's economy. Of course, being at the Western Sydney International Airport most recently, it is almost at 50% complete. The terminal is just about to hit top out. I've stood on the new airstrip. It's been terrific to see that. And most recently, I was at the rail project where Peggy, the tunnel borer, she came through, and we're seeing that project well and truly proceed. As well as the over $5 billion that we're committing out of the infrastructure investment pipeline on the airport itself, we're also committing, alongside the New South Wales Government, $4.4 billion in infrastructure to make sure that Western Sydney International Airport is connected and for the people of that area. It is an incredibly important project. It's an incredibly important economic development area, not just for New South Wales, for the whole of the country, and I look forward to being there at its opening in 2026.
Order. Before I call the member for Macon and the member for Gippsland, it may be your birthday, but you're getting close to a warning as well. Generous, but I'm not that generous. And I would like to acknowledge in the gallery Councillor Sue Moore, the Mayor of Singleton, and the Deputy Mayor Tony Jarrett, and Jodie Harns, MP, the member for Collie and Parliamentary Secretary from the Western Australian Parliament. I give the call to the member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Water. How is the Albanese Labor government protecting the Murray-Darling River system, and how has the Parliament responded to those efforts?
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker, and thanks so much to the member for Macon for his question. I know he is a fierce advocate for the whole delivery of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, as all of us on this side of the parliament are. Mr Speaker, we introduced our legislation to finalise the delivery of the plan. That legislation will provide more time, more money, more options and more accountability. And I particularly welcome all of the contributions people have made on this legislation. I really enjoyed listening to the Leader of the National Party and his contribution. He said that the coalition were on track to deliver the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. Well, that's true. That's true if you think the year 4000 is a good year to deliver the plan. Or he also said that they're on track to deliver the 450 gigalitres of environmental water. In fact, just two of those 400.
The minister will pause. I can't hear what the minister is saying because the Deputy Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the Nationals are just continually talking while the minister is trying to give an answer. Question time can't work like that. Cease interjecting or you'll leave. The minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Or the Leader of the National Party claiming that their policies to deliver the 450 gigalitres of environmental water were working when they delivered just two of those 450 in 9 years. Or that we have reached the end of the plan.
Minister, pause. Minister, pause. The Leader of the Nationals will leave the chamber under 94A. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. He claimed that we've reached the end of the plan despite the fact we predict we'll be 750 gigalitres short under the settings of those opposite. Or, most incredibly, that it's this bill that is the end of bipartisanship on the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. The end of bipartisanship came when those opposite decided to sabotage the plan instead of delivering it. Mr Speaker, I would say to the coalition, there is still room for bipartisanship here. Senator Birmingham, Senator Ruston, Senator McLaughlin and, of course, the member for Sturt have all said that they support our plans to deliver on the water for the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. So I very much hope that those senators and the member for Sturt will vote according to the comments that they've made. There's something in our proposal for everyone. There is more time to deliver on the water-saving infrastructure, something those opposite have called for and the National Farmers Federation have called for. There is also a guarantee on the 450 gigalitres of environmental water, something we support, something the Greens should support, something the Teals support, something the member for Mayo has made a very strong case for. Mr Speaker, we need to deliver on the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. We know that we are going into another hot, dry period unless we deliver environmental water, water for communities, water for farmers, water for industry and drinking water for millions of people. We will rue the day.
Minister's time has concluded. I'll give the call to the honourable member for Hume.
My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Voice architect Professor Megan Davis wrote in the Monthly, "Treaties are about reparations for past injustices. How can these things be excluded? A voice to Parliament is the first step and treaty-making follows. Will the voice be entitled to provide advice on treaty and reparations?"
Order. I give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Hume for his question. The voice will be involved giving advice on things that directly affect Indigenous people. That has been written, that has been spoken about, and that is what will happen. I have outlined that the priorities that I have are health, education, jobs and housing. They are the issues that are raised with me repetitively, and the voice is going to be a representative body that will provide advice on Indigenous Australians. Provide advice. Provide advice.
Call to the honourable member for Tangney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. How will Australia's hard-working small businesses benefit from the Albanese Labor government targeted support? Thank you.
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I do want to thank the member for Tangi for that important question. I know that he understands just how important and crucial small businesses are, not just to the national economy, but importantly to local communities. And not only do small businesses put paychecks in pockets, they are now employing more than 5.2 million Australians and contributing more than $500 billion each and every year to the Australian economy. But it was great to be with the member for Tangi in his electorate just over a week ago, hosting a roundtable of small businesses, where the small businesses were telling us about issues that concern them, and they were really interested to hear about the government's measures that will support them, because they understand that we, on this side of the parliament, are the party that backs small business, Mr Speaker. We're standing up for fairness and we're delivering to help small businesses. Today in the House.
There is far too much noise on my left. I'm now issuing a general warning. The Minister will return to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the House today, we've introduced new measures to provide support for small businesses. We've introduced the Small Business Energy Incentive, which will help up to 3.8 million small businesses with a clean energy transition and to save on their energy bills, Mr Speaker. It will help pay for upgrades for more efficient heating and cooling systems, installing batteries, switching to energy-saving electrical goods such as efficient fridges. The incentive is estimated to provide $310 million in targeted relief and will assist small businesses in laying the foundations for their future growth, Mr Speaker. And this is on top of the targeted energy bill relief that we have already provided, the $650 for around 1 million small businesses that will be coming directly off their energy bills in partnership with the states and territories. And I needn't remind those opposite, of course, that they voted against that support for small businesses, Mr Speaker. We also introduced today the $20,000 instant asset write-off to make it easier for small businesses to invest and to grow. This is estimated to provide around $290 million in targeted support, Mr Speaker, and they build on the actions that we have already taken to support small businesses. The $15 million for the free mental health and financial counselling support, access to the Commonwealth procurement rules and updating those to make sure small businesses can access more of the $80 billion in government contracts that we provide each and every year. We, of course, have passed legislation to make unfair contract terms illegal, and I thank the Assistant Minister for that. We've committed to ensuring small businesses are paid on time with a recent review of payment times for small businesses to make sure that they're not carrying the load and the balance sheets of big businesses. Mr Speaker, the Albanese government knows that small businesses are vital to the Australian economy. We'll keep working for Australian small businesses and provide them with the targeted support that they need.
Give the call to the Leader of the Australian Greens.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment. Will you stop approving new coal and gas projects?
I didn't hear that question because there was far too much noise. I'm just going to ask the Leader of the Green to ask that question again.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for the Environment. Will you stop approving new coal and gas projects?
Order. I give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. No, I'll apply Australian law as it exists, and as the Greens political party would well know, because they made an agreement with the Climate and Energy Minister, emissions in Australia are governed predominantly by the safeguard mechanism that you helped design. You negotiated with the Climate and Energy Minister. You sat on this side of the parliament and voted for
Order.
it. And, Mr Speaker, can I just add, the Greens party say they want no more coal and gas, but until recently they were happy to own shares in the banks that funded these projects. The Greens...
Order.
So righteous.
Order. Order. Just... Yeah, the Minister will pause. You can cease with all the dramatic effects. Order. The Minister for Skills is warned. The Leader of the Australian Greens on a point of order.
Speaker, on relevance, you have encouraged, in seeking direct answers or answers that are relevant, to have the shortest possible questions. This is a very short, succinct question that goes directly to the Minister's powers. There can be no capacity to stray beyond that.
Resume your seat. I'll deal with this matter. Under the standing orders, this comes up. It's not possible for the Speaker to ever indicate how a minister should answer a question. First of all, I'll remind the member to direct your questions through Standing Order 65A when you're phrasing the question. I didn't want to interrupt you before about making sure that it's directed to the minister, not through me. It's got to be through me to the chair. And the minister is answering the question. She went straight to the point of the question, and now she has a remaining 2 minutes and 5 seconds to complete her answer. She has the call.
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker. And I'll just reiterate, those Greens political party members were happy to own shares in the big banks that fund these projects. They say they want more renewable energy, but I've actually had more communication from Greens asking me to stop renewable energy projects than I've had support for renewable energy projects.
Order.
Mr Speaker, they say they care about threatened species habitat. There's a Greens political party senator who wants to bulldoze koala habitat to build luxury holiday accommodation. Mr Speaker.
Order.
Mr
Order.
Speaker.
Order. Members on my left and my right.
Mr Speaker,
the Minister will be heard in silence.
They say they want more housing. This is probably the most ironic. They say they want more housing, but they oppose every housing development in their electorates. Mr Speaker, here's the thing. We are making the biggest transition in Australian industrial history to get from 30-something% renewable energy to 82% renewable energy in our grid. Of course it doesn't happen overnight. We need solar farms, we need wind farms, we need transmission lines. They're going to oppose all of those. They're going to oppose all of those. And at the same time, they're going to cry crocodile tears about the fact we're not moving to renewables quickly enough. Mr Speaker, we've got a decade to catch up on, a decade of inaction from those opposite, a decade of inaction where we could have been moving on renewable energy, except the Liberals teamed up with the Greens to oppose action on climate change when we were last in government. Yes, we've got a big job to catch up on, a big job to catch up on, but we're getting on with the job of getting Australia to net zero.
Put the call to the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How is the Albanese Labor government working for Australian families by delivering practical cost of living relief by making early learning more affordable?
Give the call to the Minister for Early Childhood.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Spence for his question. I particularly want to make note of his unwavering advocacy for families and children in Spence and the fact that 7,200 families in Spence have benefited from our reforms introduced in the parliament last year to make early childhood and education and care more affordable by raising the childcare subsidy. And indeed, Mr Speaker, when our Prime Minister stood on the other side there and made early learning more affordable a key commitment of a Labor government, he did that because he knew it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. And from the day that we took office, we have been working for Australia to deliver on that commitment, because as a government we know that it was the right thing to do. The right thing for children, giving them every single opportunity to thrive, giving them those transformational benefits of early learning. The right thing to do for the economy, boosting productivity, increasing workforce participation, particularly for women. The right thing to do for the country, laying the foundations for a better future. And, of course, the right thing to do for families, for whom the cost of early learning and care is a significant factor when they do their household budgets. Our changes provide those families with real and responsible cost of living relief, easing the pressure on their family budgets. Practical relief that's making a real difference to Australian families. Now, Mr Speaker, as someone who relied on early learning myself,
will cease
to
interjecting for the remainder of this answer,
and my family the opportunity, in my case, to undertake paid work and to study while I raised my two sons, I know just how important early childhood education and care is. And the fact is that without it, without those early childhood educators and without access to affordable early childhood learning and care, I would not be standing here today. And I want more families to benefit from affordable early learning so that they can reach their aspirations, so that their children can thrive, so that they can pursue opportunities. That's what everyone on this side wants for Australian families. And that's why our government is working for Australia, taking practical action that takes that pressure off Australian families. It's working for Australia by putting the needs of Australian families first, with a focus on cost of living relief that doesn't add to inflation, because, Mr Speaker, we know it's the right thing to do.
Give the call to the member for Pearce.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Minister, what areas of government policy do not affect Indigenous Australians?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Braddon for your question. I have stated repeatedly where I believe the focus of the voice should be. I have consulted extensively with Aboriginal communities, including the communities in Tasmania, on what the issues are. People tell me very clearly it is about housing, it is about education, it is about jobs, and it's also about health.
Yep. The Minister will pause, and I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, the truthful answer is that every area of public policy affects Indigenous.
Resume your seat. The Leader of the House.
I just suggest, Mr Speaker, on the scale of abuses of points of order, that was pretty high. It was pretty high.
I think the Leader of the Opposition knows that was an absolute abuse of the standing orders. He's entitled to take a point of order on relevance. The Minister is 40 seconds in. He's not entitled to give a statement and simply state his view. The Minister has the call and now will be heard in silence for the remainder of her answer.
And I say this to the member for Braddon and remind the House that what we're being asked about on the 14th of October is the establishment of an advisory body. The establishment of an advisory body. And that body will give advice to the government and to this parliament. It will make sure that there is a change in the life outcomes for First Peoples, but will also be a good thing for this country.
Give the call to the honourable member for Parramatta.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. How is the Albanese Labor government working for older Australians and cleaning up the mess of a wasted decade in aged care?
Call to the Minister for Aged Care and the Minister for Sport.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Parramatta for his question and his contribution to our aged care reform project. Mr Speaker, when we were elected to government, aged care was suffering under a decade of missed opportunities to fix shocking levels of substandard care, of malnutrition and of understaffing. And over the last year, we have been fiercely committed to our mission of cleaning up the mess left by those opposite. 24/7 nurses and care minute targets legislated, new reporting on how providers spend public funds, a dedicated hotline for food complaints, free training for cooks through the Maggie Beer Foundation, an expanded PALM scheme pilot and industry labour agreements, $11.3 billion to lift the wages of aged care workers, and over 100 aged care reform projects in total. This is a government that is working for older people, and this work is having a real impact right now. It's delivering better care for older Australians right now. In the past year, Mr Speaker, there has been a reduction in the number of pressure injuries, in the number of falls, in the number of unplanned weight losses, in the use of physical restraints, and we are also seeing improvements in the star ratings data that we introduced, with fewer 1- and 2-star ratings and more 4- and 5-star ratings just since December when we brought it in. And this work is also helping build our aged care workforce. Yesterday, the Minister for Immigration and I met the amazing staff at Uniting Care Marianjani. And among those workers was Lorraine, who completed her Cert 3 at home in Suva, Fiji, before coming to Australia as part of our PALM pilot scheme. Lorraine cares for people living with dementia, and tears filled her eyes as she described to us what an honour it is to be able to look after a person as they age. And she is among 250,000 aged care workers that received a pay rise because of the decision of Fair Work and the funding provided by the Albanese Labor government. Uniting Care New South Wales and ACT Executive Director Tracy Burton said the wage rise had made life-changing differences to workers and to the sector. Not only are Uniting Care seeing an influx of new staff, they are seeing what they call boomerangs, workers who left due to the lack of support provided by those opposite and who are now returning to aged care because they are finally being paid what they deserve. Data received from SEEK shows that there has been a 66% increase in applications for aged care nursing roles and a 55% increase for personal care job ads from January to June this year. This is what it looks like, Mr Speaker, when you have a government that cares, a government that is working for Australia.
Time. Give a call to the Prime Minister. Order. Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. On that very positive note, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Order. We'll move to papers. Just as members leave the chamber, pursuant to the resolution of the House of Representatives on 11 October 1984, I present a report on access to committee documents.